leading food retailer has gouged more than £3 billion in profits from its customers over the past 2 years alone. With food inflation now at 19%, does the Minister agree that we're living through a cost of greed crisis? And when will this government get serious about tackling the excessive profiteering that's driving up prices and causing real pain for families across Wales and the UK?
Well, Mr Speaker, the government is very serious about dealing with the cost of living crisis, and that's why I'm very pleased that inflation is actually shown to be continuing to fall at the moment, and this government is on track to reach its target of halving inflation over the next year. And this government has always supported the most vulnerable in society, which is why I'm very pleased that we've made sure that pensions and benefits and the minimum wage have gone up in line with inflation.
So the Select Committee, Stephen Crabb.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. This government continues to spend extraordinary sums of money supporting family incomes during this difficult time. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that what is not fair to the taxpayer is giving people free cash, including young asylum seekers, no strings attached, through a poorly targeted universal basic income? Isn't that not what responsible welfare is all about?
Well, Mr Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely correct, and it really is extraordinary that the Welsh Labour Party want to spend millions of pounds on handing out a universal basic income to people, including asylum seekers, and then not only that, Mr Speaker, but to then exempt them from having to pay the same legal bills that the rest of us would be subject to. This government is going to continue supporting the most vulnerable in society, and that's why I'm very pleased not only with the raising of pensions, benefits and minimum wage in line with inflation, but the extra payments made to those most in need.
Alex Davies-Jones.
Mr Speaker, last week, in response to the cost of living crisis, the Labour government in Wales increased the educational maintenance allowance to £40 per week. This boost is a lifeline to thousands of students in Wales, and I'm proud that we have a Labour Party stepping up to help while the UK government have turned a blind eye. Now, I'm sure the Secretary of State welcomes the uplift, so can he therefore share what discussions he's having with his Cabinet colleagues to ensure that the UK government can once again follow the Welsh Labour government's lead?
Well, Mr Speaker, I can assure the honourable lady that there are no circumstances under which the UK Conservative government would want to follow the lead of the Welsh Labour government, which is coming forward with policies such as raising taxes by wanting to charge people for using the motorways, bringing in a tourism tax, Mr Speaker, and even scrapping meal deals. How is that going to help a cost of living crisis?
Mr Speaker, just hammering home the point that has already been raised, does the Secretary of State agree with me that it speaks to the kind of values that the Labour Party have, that they are prioritising providing huge support for those who have illegally entered our country over maximising cost of living support for Welsh citizens? And actually the same might be the case in England if the Labour government were ever to be elected.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely correct, and the humanitarian response is to disincentivise people from risking their lives by crossing the channel illegally and arriving here in small boats. And that's why last night I jointly signed a letter which rejected what the Welsh Labour government are asking for. We're not prepared to see the Welsh Labour government handing out universal basic incomes to people who shouldn't be in this country in the first place, and then on top of that to provide them with legal funding and lawyers so that they can challenge the decision being made by the government. These are not the priorities that the Welsh people have.
Shadow Secretary of State Joe Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Inflation is still over 10%, and last month the Chancellor imposed a stealth tax by freezing personal allowances. And today, as we've heard, the Office for National Statistics has confirmed that food prices have risen at their fastest rate for 45 years. So how does the Secretary of State expect Welsh households to afford even the most basic supermarket essentials when those have increased by almost 25% this year?
Well, Mr Speaker, of course the honourable lady is correct that we have had financial problems as a result of having to spend £400 billion during the COVID pandemic and the inflation which has been caused by the illegal invasion of Ukraine. And that's why the government has continued to support the most vulnerable in society. But the fact of the matter is the Welsh Labour's government response to all of this seems to be to squander taxpayers' money. £100 million going to create extra members of the Senate, £150 million wasted building on plans for a relief road that was never going to be built, and now millions more pounds to be spent on our universal basic income and legal fees for asylum seekers.
Joe Stevens.
The Secretary of State mentioned inflation earlier, but of course falling inflation doesn't mean prices are falling, just that the rate of the price rises is slowing. And if Cabinet Ministers can't get a grip on basics like that, no wonder the economy is in such a mess. So isn't the reality this? His government continues to fail households right across Wales whilst protecting and rewarding the super wealthy, refusing to abolish non-dom status and giving a huge pension bung to the top 1%.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, of course, the so-called top pension bung was for doctors, which is something actually that members of the Labour Party had called for themselves. And if the honourable lady is seriously worried about food prices, perhaps she could explain why it is that the Welsh Labour government want to scrap meal deals and stop people enjoying a drink and a packet of crisps with their food. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we will prioritise our help towards the most vulnerable, while the Welsh Labour government continues to squander it on people who don't need it.
Liz Roberts.
My constituents, Malcolm, Atherton and Beth Clower, run a cafe in Trawsfynydd, and they've had to face the heartbreaking decision to hibernate their business in the face of cripplingly high energy bills. Small and medium businesses are the beating heart of the Welsh economy, and they employ 62.6% of Welsh workers. Yet they received no additional support with their energy bills from the Chancellor in the spring budget. To ensure that Malcolm and Beth can one day reopen their cafe, will he be urging his colleagues in the Treasury to increase the energy support available to small businesses?
Here. Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady will be aware that the government have provided an unprecedented package of subsidies for businesses through this winter worth £18 billion, and those were figures set out by the OBR. And then in addition to this, there's been things like the freeze on fuel duty. So I am very sorry to hear about the circumstance that some individual businesses face, but I can absolutely assure the honourable lady that supporting businesses through this difficult time remains a priority for this Conservative government.
Liz Roberts.
Of course, businesses who are off-grid have suffered another experience and lack of support. But with Mr Speaker's tolerance, I'd like to take the opportunity to raise another matter with the Secretary of State for Wales. Thames Water wastes 630 million litres of water every day through leaky pipes. Rather than fix this environmentally baffling waste, they're planning on moving vast volumes of water from Wales instead. Our natural resources are being diverted elsewhere without recompense and without consultation either with local people. He says he's Wales's man in Cabinet. Will he prove it, therefore, by activating Section 48 of the Wales Act 2017 so that decisions about Wales resources are made by the people of Wales in Wales?
Sorry. Can I just say to the honourable lady, I've got a lot of people trying to get it. It's unfair. You do get the two questions. Please do not take advantage of the rest of the chairman. Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not responsible for for Thames Water, but I have regular meetings with Welsh Water, and this is not an issue which they've raised with me. But one of the things that I'm sure the honourable lady will agree with is that Welsh Water do need to do more to ensure that there is less sewage and less leakage going into our rivers. And that, of course, is something which the Welsh Labour government is responsible for holding them to account for.
John McNally.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 2 and 13 together. The Welsh Government is well funded to deliver for Wales. The spending review provided the Welsh Government with a record block grant of £18 billion a year. As a result of this budget, Welsh Government funding is increasing by a further £180 million over the next 2 years, and this is all on top of the additional £1.2 billion announced at the autumn statement.
John McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for that answer. But the UK Government, as you've just alluded to, has recently clawed back £155 million from the Welsh Government budget rather than allowing it to be carried forward into the next financial year. I can only assume that by clawing back these funds, for some bizarre reason, the Minister thinks the UK Government is working in the best interests of the Welsh people. Can you tell us if that is so?
Mr. Speaker, the funds weren't clawed back, and there wasn't any bizarre reasoning about it. The money wasn't spent by the Welsh Government. They managed to fail to spend £155 million in the midst of a pandemic, which is really quite extraordinary. But, Mr. Speaker, they are receiving £1.20 on the NHS for every pound spent in the United Kingdom, and that money is not being passed on in full, which is why, in Wales, under a Labour government, we wait longer for our ambulances, we wait longer on hospital waiting lists, and we have less access to the treatment that people are now taking for granted in England.
Secretary of State.
Making the case for precisely the kind of financial flexibility the devolved administrations require. The reality of inflation and mishandling of the economy is that the Welsh budget is worth £4 billion less than it was when it was first agreed, and the same thing's happening in Scotland. So if the government won't adequately finance the devolved institutions, why won't they devolve reasonable borrowing powers so we can make sure that adequate budgets are set for the benefit of our constituents?
Mr. Speaker, if I ever decide that I want to have some lessons in sound management of public finances, I probably won't be asking the Scottish National Party. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is the Welsh Labour government have had a real terms increase in spending over the spending review period, and it is for others to answer why it is that they're unable to deliver the same level of healthcare, the same level of education, why it is that they're not building roads, and why it is that they're using the money they are getting to spend on paying the legal bills of asylum seekers.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under this UK government, does the Secretary of State agree with me that as my constituency of Anismore has been awarded £17 million levelling up funds to regenerate Holyhead, $20 million to refurbish the Holyhead Breakwater, $16 million from the Shared Prosperity Fund, $2.7 from the CRF, hundreds of new jobs at the Inland Border Facility, £175 million at Ira Valley, and now Anglesey has Freeport status with the potential to create 13,000 jobs and £1 billion to the economy. Does the Secretary agree with me that this Conservative UK government is determined to level up places like Anglesey in North Wales that have been forgotten by Labour in Cardiff?
Can we just try and help it? I want to get more people in. The only way I can do that with shorter questions. Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, others in this House may try to shout the Honourable Lady down, but they won't succeed because she has been absolutely unstinting in her support for her constituency. And it's no coincidence that the Prime Minister wanted to go to Innismon to make that the first place he visited as the Prime Minister to celebrate the announcement of the growth deals, which are going to deliver jobs and levelling up across the whole of Wales and the United Kingdom.
The fabricant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Diolch indeed. Many of my constituents, including myself actually, visit Tywyn in Gwynedd. Is my right honourable friend aware that people need healthcare there, funded of course by the grant? And yet Tywyn Hospital has closed its minor injuries unit, it's closed its inpatient ward. Will my right honourable friend speak to the Welsh Health Minister and discuss how English tourists will get proper health care when they're on holiday in Wales?
Mr. Speaker, I'm as ever grateful to my honourable friend for his comments. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is I'm unable to give a detailed answer because the National Health Service is devolved in Wales. But I very much hope, Mr. Speaker, that Welsh Labour government ministers will want to explain why it is that with all of the extra money that they're getting, with the extra money that they're getting above the money that is given to the National Health Service in England, they're unable to deliver the same standards of healthcare, or for that matter education, as those which we take for granted under a Conservative government run in Westminster.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State has regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a range of topics. In England, we have committed to tackling issues in the private rental sector, including improving standards through the introduction of the Decent Home Standard and providing tenants greater security by banning no-fault evictions. However, as the Right Honourable Member will know, rental issues in Wales are a matter for the Welsh Government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Low-quality, expensive private rented accommodation is a problem not only in Wales but throughout the UK. Would the Minister agree with me that we need more council housing built to a high standard? And would he join with me in praising Flintshire County Council for their excellent programme of council house building, which would be an example to the rest of the country, but we need more investment in this area overall?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for that question. North Wales certainly has a deficit of housing, as do many other areas, and certainly that needs to be addressed through building more homes, as he says. I would point out that in 2021 to 22, there were 3 new homes built in England per 1,000 and just 1.7 per 1,000 in Wales, so there's much work to do.
Jones. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. According to Rent Smart Wales, the number of registered landlords in Wales
fell by 328 during the 2 years to January of this year, and there were 301 fewer rental properties available. Does my honourable friend agree that a significant cause of the current worrying state of the private rental market in Wales is the new legislation introduced by the Welsh Government, which imposes expensive and Byzantine licensing obligations on landlords? And does he also agree with the Labour Cabinet Member for Housing on Torfaen Borough Council, Councillor David Daniels, who recently told the Council's Scrutiny Committee that the new law was the straw that broke the camel's back because for landlords it's just been one thing too many?
Yeah. Well, I thank my right honourable friend and constituency neighbour. I think he is perfectly right to raise this issue. He's referring to the Renting Homes Wales Act, and while it may be well-intentioned, the fact of the matter is there's a shortage of housing, and in fact, if you want to keep landlords in the market, you need to incentivise it for them. So the mandatory regulations and costs imposed are really at the wrong time.
Gerald Jones, Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Private rental costs in Wales increased by 4.2% in the year to February 2023, the highest annual percentage change since the Tories came to power. Whilst the government have accepted the need to uplift benefits in line with inflation, they've completely failed to accept that the same principle should at the very least apply to the local housing allowance. Given that this affects the largest item of a family's budget, can the Minister explain exactly why this is one area of policy where the government do not seem to believe that inflation exists?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He will be aware that the local housing allowance rates were raised to the 30th percentile in 2020, and that there is also support through the discretionary housing payments scheme. There is, in addition to that, of course, the whole array of support that's been provided through the recent cost of living pressures.
Liz Twist.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 4 and 12 together. I regularly engage with Cabinet Ministers on a range of transport measures. Over £390 million has already been provided for rail improvements in Wales since 2020, including Bow Street Station, the electrification of the Severn Tunnel and Cardiff Crossrail.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Avanti chaos has hit services between Holyhead and Crewe. For communities of North Wales and the North West of England, this line is an ongoing nightmare. What guarantees will he provide that those services will be restored?
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually the Honourable Lady does have a point here. There have been a number of complaints made about Avanti by members of Parliament on all sides of the House, and I think there's a recognition that things could be a lot better than they actually are. Avanti are well aware of this and have been told that they need to improve the service quickly, and I can assure the Honourable Lady that DfT are well aware of the problems she's just raised.
Leslie Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rail connectivity is crucial to the border communities of Wales and England, such as connections between Wrexham and Merseyside. Furthermore, Merseyside is just as inaccessible for some communities in the north of England as it is in Wales. Skelmersdale, in my constituency, is a community of 40,000 people, but has been left without access to a train station since 1958. Can the Minister tell me how the government plans to make sure our communities on both sides of the border have access to rail services?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome that question from the Honourable Lady, and I'm sure that the people of North Wales would welcome many more of her constituents coming down to visit and spending money in the local tourism industry if they can afford the tourism tax that's being imposed by the Welsh Labour government. To answer the lady's question simply, there will be an RNet review out shortly. I hope it will, and believe it will contain good news for rail users across Wales, which will benefit travellers from across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Kevin Foster.
With meal deal bans, tourism taxes and road charges, no surprise many Welsh roads will be thinking of getting the train for holiday in Torbay instead to avoid all of them. What discussions is he having to ensure that the rail infrastructure between South Wales and the South West of England will be able to cope with this demand?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure Torbay is a wonderful place, but I would still recommend that people come to Wales and instead enjoy the coastline of all parts of Wales. But of course, to do that, they would either need to go by train or by car, and it's unfortunate that the Welsh Labour government have also decided to stop all road building whereas the United Kingdom government is getting on with building roads and building railways.
Kaczynski.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most important rail links into mid-Wales is the one through Shrewsbury. We're very proud being a border community and our links with Wales. We are campaigning for electrification of this line from Birmingham to Shrewsbury and beyond to Wales. Will he take an interest in our project to try to electrify this vital artery for residents in mid-Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will of course take an interest in this matter, but it is a matter more for the DFT than for my good self. But what I have taken an interest in is the fact that there is a great deal of work going on in the Forest of Dean area to ensure that that commuters on both sides of the border are able to enjoy more reliable rail travel.
Robbie Moore.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The spring budget delivered for Wales. As announced in the budget, the government will provide £20 million to restore the Holyhead breakwater, will deliver at least one investment zone in Wales, and will provide up to £20 billion for the development of carbon capture, usage and storage across the UK, which Wales is well placed to benefit from.
More.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK government proved time and time again that they are delivering for Wales, whether that's through supporting hundreds of thousands of households with the energy price guarantee or the £20 million Holyhead breakwater. However, does my right honourable friend agree with me that Labour Welsh governments are advertising Wales as closed for business with its recent ban on road building and tax on tourism?
Well, I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend. The Welsh Government's response to the roads review was more of a road block than a response, and there's been a widespread rejection of the tourism tax from the sector, including from UK hospitality, who've called it anti-competitive. The contrast between the approaches of the two governments is stark, Mr. Speaker. The UK government is striking trade deals and promoting Britain open for business, while the Welsh Government seems focused on punishing small business owners.
Sir Christopher Bryant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A little birdie tells me that the Secretary of State has had a meeting about the Rhondda Tunnel in the last few days, and I'm hoping very much, Mr. Speaker, as no doubt are you, that there's going to be some announcement soon of perhaps of some money to make sure that the Rhondda Tunnel can be opened up, making it the second longest cycle tunnel in the whole of Europe and a great advert for tourism in the Welsh valleys. Will he arrange a meeting with me and the member for Aberavon so that we can explain to him the significant benefits that there would be so that he can lobby to get that money for the Rhondda Tunnel?
The right honourable member is right to raise that question. My right honourable friend tells me that he would be happy to hold a meeting with the right honourable member. He also adds that Rhondda Cynon Taf Council should be encouraged to put in a levelling up fund bid.
Romeo.
Number 6, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do indeed have discussions with the Welsh Government about the adequacy of Welsh healthcare services, most recently about Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board being put back into special measures. It should be noted, however, that the Department for Health and Social Care regularly engages and collaborates with the Welsh Government to share best practice on achieving better outcomes for patients UK-wide.
Jerome Mayo.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State has just told us that the Welsh Government receives £1.20 in health funding for every pound spent in England. And yet, despite this, the Welsh Government, the only government in the United Kingdom which is actually cutting funding to the NHS. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that the Labour Party has proved incapable in office of running health services?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do very much share his concern across Wales and especially in North Wales. And yesterday, the latest troubling revelations about Betsy Cadwaladr, we learned that the First Minister was wrong to state that the Auditor-General had recommended taking the board out of special measures just prior to the devolved elections of 2020. And when it comes to funding, Mr. Speaker, Welsh Government may repeatedly call for more money, but they're the only government in the UK to cut health spending. And in the latest budget, they've set out plans to cut day-to-day spending on the delivery of NHS services in real terms this year compared to last, while the UK government's providing a real terms in...
Thank you. Question number 7, sir.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State for Wales has regular discussions with the First Minister on how our two governments can work together within the current devolution settlement to deliver for Wales. Our recent agreement to establish 2 Welsh free ports shows what we can achieve when we work together for the benefit of people and communities in Wales.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you. Given that the Senedd only sits for 2 days a week, and if yesterday's reports are anything to go by, the First Minister is less than truthful with his answers anyway. Can my honourable friend fathom any reason why they need to expand Senedd membership by 60% at huge cost to the Welsh taxpayer? And does he agree with me that the Welsh people should be asked whether they want more MSs, only working 2 days a week?
Well, the honourable member is right to ask that question. I fully agree with him that the last thing people in Wales want is more politicians in Cardiff Bay, and the Welsh Government would be better spending the estimated £100 million that the proposals would cost on public services. So if the Welsh Government and their separatist allies are so confident that these proposals should progress, then I agree they should seek the agreement of people in Wales through a referendum.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Abner Poglasari.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, later today I will return to Belfast to mark the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. It's an opportunity to thank some of the leading architects of peace for their courage and the pivotal role they played to set the groundwork for a better future for the people of Northern Ireland. We will also commemorate those who are no longer with us. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We're in the middle of a housing crisis with mortgages soaring, rents rising and house building set to a post-low. And just last week, with an interview with the Conservative Home, the Prime Minister admitted his disastrous decision to drop housing targets to appease Tory party members. Can the Prime Minister please explain to the House why the views of 1,000 members are more important to aspiring homeowners, families across the country?
Well, Mr Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe in empowering local communities to make the decisions that are right for them and to protect their green spaces. And the place where most acutely where house building is not keeping up with need is in Labour-controlled London.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's been reported that the Welsh Labour Government is going to incentivise people smugglers by offering £1,600 of taxpayers' money every month to asylum seekers. Can I ask my right honourable friend for an assurance that he will never contemplate such a daft idea in our small boats bill?
Well, Mr Speaker, I know my noble friend Lord Bellamy and the Secretary of State for Wales wrote to the Welsh Government yesterday confirming that we would not be undertaking their request. Now, I know that the Labour leader has said that the Welsh Labour Government is his blueprint. And unbelievably, as my honourable friend said, Labour in Wales are trying to pay illegal migrants £1,600. Mr Speaker, we're stopping the boats. Labour's paying for them.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Tory party chair says that public services are in pretty good shape. Has the Prime Minister met a single member of the public who agrees with him?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, because of the record investment that we're putting into public services like the NHS, we're now getting waiting lists down. Because of the reforms that we've made to our education system, more children are studying in good and outstanding schools. Because that's what you get with a Conservative government: more funding, more reform and better outcomes for Britain.
He's living in another world to the rest of us. People waiting more than 2 days from an ambulance because they broke the NHS. Only 1 in 100 rapists going to court because they broke the criminal justice system. A record number of small boats crossing the Channel because they broke the asylum system. People can't afford their bills, can't get the police to investigate crimes, can't get a doctor's appointment. Does that really sound like pretty good shape to him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what's the record? Since 2010, since 2010, crime down by 50% under the Conservative government, Mr. Speaker. 20,000 more police officers, we've given them more powers, and we've toughened up sentencing, all opposed by Sir Softy over there.
Mr. Speaker, either the Prime...
Order. Our constituents want to hear the question and the answers. What I would say is, you'll progress questions beyond. The Prime Minister wants to leave early, along with the Leader of the Opposition. Help me to help them.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, either the Prime Minister doesn't use the same public services to the rest of us, or he simply can't see the damage they've done to our country. In 2019, Ariel Lee, a convicted people smuggler, threw boiling water over a prison officer, leaving him with first-degree burns. The prison officer said it felt like acid. His face was on fire. His attacker was found guilty, received a prison sentence, quite right in my view. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Well, Mr. Speaker, while record is clear on sentencing, it was this party and this government that passed the Sentencing Act last year. It toughened up sentences, and the average custodial sentence has now increased since 2010 by almost 2/3. For child sex abusers, it's up by 15 months, and for rapists, it's up by 2 years. And when our Sentencing Act ended the automatic early release of offenders who pose a danger to the public, it was the Labour Party who voted against it.
Well, the problem is, Prime Minister, Ariel Lee's sentence ended up being suspended. And anyone watching this would wonder why someone who violently attacks a key worker isn't behind bars. Well, the court judgment spelt it out. It's because it took 16 months for the attacker to be charged. That's ridiculous. And it took another 2 years before he was sentenced. Completely unacceptable. Can't the Prime Minister see that because they've lost control of the court service, because they've created the largest court backlog on record, he's letting violent criminals go free?
Mr. Speaker, here's a record. We're cracking down on grooming gangs, and he's uncomfortable, Mr. Speaker, he's uncomfortable addressing. We toughened the law on sex offenders so they spend longer in prison. He voted against it, Mr. Speaker. And we've increased rape convictions by over 60%. Meanwhile, he attended 21 sentencing council meetings that watered down punishments. That's why they call him Sir Softy. Soft on crime, soft on criminals.
Mr. Speaker, I've prosecuted thousands upon thousands of sex offenders. He's just shown he doesn't understand how the criminal justice system works. No wonder he can't fix it. And he thinks that cracking down on crime is suspending a sentence where someone should be in prison. That shows the problem. And another reason, Mr. Speaker, another reason cited by the court for suspending the sentence in Ariel Lee's case was a letter from the Justice Secretary in February about prison overcrowding. As a result of that letter, courts have been told to have awareness of the impact of current prison population levels when passing sentences. In simple terms, the wrecking ball the Tories have taken to criminal justice means that thousands of people who should be in prison aren't. The court also said, he shakes his head, he should read the judgment. The court also said that it's for the government to say when prison conditions return to a more normal state. Now, I know the Justice Secretary has been busy trying to save his own job rather than actually doing it, but has the Prime Minister asked him when he's going to get a grip on the prison system and withdraw that letter which is allowing criminals to walk free?
Mr. Speaker, we're in the process of building 20,000 more prison places. That's what this government is delivering, because we're toughening up sentencing and putting more people behind bars and making sure that our most serious offenders spend longer there. But I love it when he talks about his record as a lefty lawyer, Mr. Speaker, because I was looking at this, because when he was there, I read, he's quoting things, I read that people were really disappointed that his organisation let down victims. That wasn't even my assessment. That was his shadow Attorney General.
I want to get through these questions, so do my constituents. If there's any member whose constituents they aren't interested in, please leave the chamber. Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when I was in office as Director of Public Prosecutions, those benches my greatest supporters. In 2013, the Home Affairs Select Committee said, we would like to commend the work of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer. He's striven to improve the treatment of sexual assault. They go on to say...
Can we... Prime Minister's questions matter to our constituents. I wonder if I were you. It's not the day. I want to get through it because I'm trying to help the Prime Minister and the Leader. You're not being helpful. We'll hear this question no matter how long it takes. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this is 2030.
Order. Ms Stevenson, I've heard a few weeks. This is the last week. I suggest you quiet, or it's better you leave. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this is the Home Affairs Select Committee in 2013. They go on to say the work I did should provide a model to other agencies, and when he leaves the CPS, he will be missed. Now, that report was presented to Parliament by the then Home Secretary, future Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead. And the government, those benches, noted and supported it. Now, it's obviously always a good look to have your work recognised, although they did lay it on a bit thick. So perhaps the Prime Minister will spend less time trying to rewrite history and more time sorting out the mess he's made of criminal justice. Because the crisis in criminal justice is just a snapshot of public services collapsing under his watch. People can see it wherever they look. Our roads, our trains, the NHS, the asylum system, policing, mental health provision. The Tories have broken them all they've got left is excuses and blame. Now, I know the Prime Minister would rather talk about a maths lesson than the state of the country, but perhaps he could solve this equation. Why, after 13 years of a Tory government, are patients waiting longer than ever, criminals walking free, growth non-existent, and why, everywhere you look, does nothing seem to work at all?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can't quite remember, but I think he started by talking about when he was DPP in 2013. And I'm actually glad he brought that up, because there was something else that happened when he was DPP in 2013. And that was when he got his own special law, Mr. Speaker. I've got it right here. It's the pensions increase. It's the pensions increase for Keir Starmer.
Order. Just a moment. Can I just say, order. I expect both sides to listen to the questions and the answers. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, here it is. It's the pensions increase pension scheme for Keir Starmer, QC, 2013. Now, while we're introducing a transformative policy to support doctors to cut the waiting list faster, he wants to raise taxes on public sector workers. And it's one law for him and tax rises for everyone else.
Don't let me double down on you. Please, Sally Ann Hart.
Mr. Speaker. Recently, I presented a Prime Minister's Point of Light Award to Joan Willett, nearly 107, for her fundraising for the British Heart Foundation. And two other Hastings and Rye residents, Anthony Kimber and Alistair Felly, were celebrated as community champions at number 10. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking all our fantastic volunteers and community champions, not only in Hastings and Rye, but throughout the United Kingdom, and will he continue to bring them together in celebration?
Can I thank my honourable friend, and I'm absolutely delighted that Joan received her Points of Light award, and volunteers and community champions like Joan and Anthony and Alistair all make important contributions to their local community, and we're all very grateful to them. In fact, every month, Mr. Speaker, millions do the same thing, and they deserve our praise. Their generosity is integral to what makes our country and our community special, and it's right that we do everything we can to celebrate them.
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn. As I said, I really do want to try and help the Prime Minister. If you don't, I do. Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to hear that they had an equally peaceful and relaxing Easter break as I did. Prime Minister, was it their refusal to stand alongside striking workers on the picket line, their acceptance of the economic damage being caused by Brexit, or perhaps their support for denying the people of Scotland the right to choose their own future, which led to the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party urging voters to back Labour?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing is not getting distracted by the things that are going on elsewhere, and we're focused on delivering for the people of Scotland. We're making sure that we fund public services well with £1.5 billion extra in Barnett consequentials. We're making sure that we provide support with the cost of living. Now, I know, Mr. Speaker, at the moment, him and his party are focused on other matters. We're just going to motor on with the job.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. We will take no lectures from a party which has not had a mandate to govern in Scotland since 1955. He went through 3 Prime Ministers in the course of just a matter of months. Who crashed the economy, who sent mortgage rates soaring, who've taken energy support away from families most in need. Now, a Prime Minister has been fined by the police not once, but twice, who take donations from Russian-backed donors and who, of course, have stuffed the House of Lords with people like Baroness Mone. But, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. What we're talking about is the fact that the leader of the Scottish Conservatives believes that the people of Scotland should return Labour Party members of Parliament to this House rather than Scottish National Party members to this House. So isn't the message to the people of Scotland quite clear? Don't give the Tories what they want.
Mr. Speaker, actually, the Scottish Conservatives deserve enormous praise for forcing the SNP into abandoning their completely unworkable, fundamentally flawed deposit return scheme, Mr. Speaker. So it's good that the SNP U-turned and listened to the voices of the Scottish Conservatives and to business, and we look forward to working with them on delivering something that actually works to deliver for the people of Scotland. And that's just it, Mr. Speaker, because if they can't fix the mess that Nicola Sturgeon left their party in, how can they possibly fix the mess that she left Scotland in?
Mr. Speaker, it seems clear that the junior doctors' strike is causing serious risk of loss of life and certainly causing harm and pain to thousands of our constituents. The first line of Hippocratic Oath is first do no harm. When does the Prime Minister think the BMA abandoned this central tenet of their profession?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question. We value the work of junior doctors and are keen to find a fair and reasonable settlement which recognises their role and the wider economic context facing the UK. He's right to highlight the impact on patient safety, and that's why this government has brought forward minimum safety legislation to ensure that patients can rely on a core level of emergency service to protect vital patient care. That's something that we on this side of the House support, but I know is not something that's supported by the party opposite.
Ed Davey.
Speaker, tooth decay is the #1 reason that children over 4 end up in hospital. Regular dental checkups could prevent that, but too many parents can't get one for their child. In the East Riding of Yorkshire, there are now almost 3,000 people per NHS dentist. In places like Herefordshire and Norfolk, fewer than 2 in 5 children were seen by a dentist in the past year. This is a scandal, Mr. Speaker. So will the Prime Minister take up the Liberal Democrat plan to end this crisis and make sure people can get an NHS dentist when they need one?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NHS recently reformed dentistry contracts, which will improve access for patients. Dentistry receives about £3 billion a year. There are around 500 more dentists delivering care in the NHS last year than the year before. He mentioned children. I'm pleased to say that almost 45% more children saw an NHS dentist in that year compared to the year before.
Anne-Marie Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Prime Minister's question time on the 4th of February 2015, David Cameron said he was determined to do whatever it took to fix the Dawlish railway line, the only route to the southwest. Phase 4 risks losing part of its agreed funding, while Phase 5 falls foul of a 10-year moratorium on new funding. The line is only as resilient as its weakest link. Will the Prime Minister commit to getting this resilience programme back on track and fully funded?
Mr. Speaker, we're committed to improving the resilience of this iconic stretch of railway. It provides a vital link for people in the South West. That's why today we've invested over £165 million in delivering solutions to protect the line, and I know Network Rail is continuing to develop the case for further investment, and my honourable friend will be keen to feed into that.
Bristol Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this week my city of Dundee not only announced its flights will be connecting with Heathrow, but also the Scottish Government's commitment to Dundee being at the forefront of making Scotland a major world economy, both bringing investment, jobs and opportunity. However, the UK Government seems to have a problem with this. Mr. Speaker, Scotland's international engagement is to be reduced. Despite being paid for through Scotland's wealth and taxes, UK ambassadors and diplomats have been instructed to obstruct the Scottish Government's international engagement, with every foreign nation worldwide told not to deal with the Scottish Government directly. This, Mr. Speaker, has already been described as, and I quote, smacking of a parent trying and failing to control a teenager. So will the Prime Minister assure me and the businesses, wealth creators and most importantly my constituents that want to see Dundee and Scotland prosper, that while Scotland's short time left in this unequal union remains, Scotland will neither be put back in a box or will be bending knee?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm actually pleased to say that we are supporting the communities of Dundee. They received £14 million in the Levelling Up Fund to support Green Transport Hub in the city centre. It's a demonstration of the UK Government wanting to invest in communities in Scotland and deliver for Scottish people.
So keep at it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, I joined my 17-year-old constituent Alfie Ford in walking to raise funds for the National Autistic Society. Alfie's mission is to walk 15,000 steps every day in the month of April to raise awareness around autism and to show that every autistic person deserves the best chance in life. This Saturday, he's walking from Birmingham City Football Club to Edgbaston Stadium and then back to Birmingham City Football Club. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing Alfie the very best for his walk and his noble mission to change the way people think about autism for good?
Can I start by praising Alfie for his fantastic efforts? He's an inspiration not just to his community, but to many others, and I wish him the best of luck for Saturday. Our autism strategy sets out our ambition to ensure that autistic people across all parts of the country get the support they need to live fulfilling and happy lives, and I look forward to seeing Alfie's progress on the rest of his journey.
Do you see MacDonald?
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Lisa and her civil service colleagues have worked tirelessly and with distinction during some of the most challenging times. But she's fed up with ministers patting them on the back all the while imposing derisory 2% and now 4.5% pay rises, despite years of pay restraint and now double-digit inflation. She asked simply, why should I keep working for a UK government that treats its workers with such contempt? So, will the Prime Minister stop with the myths and excuses and start negotiating a fair deal with the unions?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to all our hard-working public sector workers for the job they do. We have a well-established independent pay review body process for making sure that we can have pay settlements that are fair and affordable, and I'm very pleased that we reached agreement with many unions on those pay settlements, and I hope that those members vote in support of them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that those who seek to criticise the Conservative record on law and order should look in the mirror and ask the question, who was Director of Public Prosecutions for some of those years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. Our record is clear. We've halved crime since 2010. Neighbourhood crime has fallen 25% just in the last few years. Criminals are spending longer in prison, and crucially, we, unlike the party opposite, are giving them the powers they need to tackle violent protests.
Owen Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, my elderly constituent Anne has been in Turkey for 5 weeks now after her husband suffered a devastating brain bleed and is now in intensive care after their holiday insurance, Stay Sure, refused to pay medical bills and have so far refused to engage with me. This has resulted in Anne being stuck with extortionate medical bills and surgery costs which she has covered using their life savings. With finances running out, they're both stranded and have been advised that they'll need to find at least £50,000 to pay for an air ambulance to bring them home. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to consider all the possible options to support constituents like Anne and her husband in difficult situations like this, especially where insurance companies abdicate all responsibility?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? I'm very sorry to hear about the case that he raises. My thoughts, as I'm sure everyone's, will be with Anne and her husband at this difficult time. I will ensure that he gets a meeting as soon as possible with the relevant minister to discuss and progress this case further.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Can I tell a tale of two councils? My constituents who live in Conservative-controlled Wychavon District Council have enjoyed 6 years of council tax freezes and excellent public services, while my constituents who live in the Malvern Hills District Council area, which is run by a ragtag bag of so-called independents and Greens, pay nearly 50% more in council tax for a bandy property. Does the Prime Minister agree that the best thing that my constituents can do for the cost of living is to vote Conservative on the floor?
My honourable friend is of course right. Right across the country, those in Conservative councils pay lower council tax than those of the party opposite. And the choice at this election is clear. It's the Conservatives that deliver for you. It's Labour that costs you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Women's Rights Network published a report by criminologist Professor Joe Phoenix called When We Are at Our Most Vulnerable, revealing that between January 2019 and October 2022, which includes the pandemic lockdown, of course, there were a staggering 6,539 reported rapes and sexual assaults in UK hospital settings. That's an average of 33 incidents every single week. And as 8 police forces did not provide any data, the real figures are bound to be significantly higher. What can the Prime Minister and his government do to ensure that all women, staff and patients are safe in Britain's hospitals?
Can I first of all say I was deeply shocked, like the right honourable lady, and appalled to hear about the cases of sexual assault and abuse in the NHS, and I pay tribute to her for her long-standing campaign on these issues. NHS organisations are responsible for protecting their staff and patients from sexual harassment and conduct. They've recently established a domestic abuse and sexual violence programme to build more robust safeguarding processes for protecting patients. We will work very closely with them to ensure that that is implemented, and I know she will hold us to account for doing that.
Simon Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the
2nd of June, Corwin Station on the Llangollen Steam Railway will be officially reopened, having been closed 60 years ago under the Beeching Acts. Would the Prime Minister join me in congratulating the volunteers, the local community and the funders who have made this possible, and also take his own share of the credit for granting the Levelling Up Fund to Clwyd South when he was Chancellor, which has paid for the magnificent new roof on Corwin Station?
Well, I pay tribute to my honourable friend for all his campaigning on this. I'm delighted that Levelling Up Fund has delivered for Corwin Station. It's a huge boost to local ambitions to see trains returning there, and I know that a small team of the project's volunteers have actually built the majority of the station. They deserve credit, and indeed a local company in Wrexham has supplied the new steelwork for the canopy roof, providing a welcome boost to the local economy, and I look forward to seeing the station open this summer.
Mr. Speaker, over recess I was invited to visit one of the major supermarkets in my constituency to discuss food waste. But what struck me most was the experience of shop workers on the front line. They told me they expect to suffer a violent assault every single day they go to work. So while more maths might always be helpful, what is this out-of-touch Prime Minister doing to make sure that people can be safe in their workplace?
Well, Mr. Speaker, everyone deserves to be safe in their workplace, and that's why we're making sure that through our Sentencing Act we have appropriate sentencing in place for that, and more generally making sure that there are police officers and community support officers across the country to help combat crime. We'll happily look at future sentencing when we look at reviews of that case.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Leadership and teamwork delivered Bolton Wanderers' superb 4-0 victory in the Papa John's Trophy at Wembley. It's delivering the Bolton College of Medical Sciences and delivered Ayub Patel's superb Rungworth by-election victory. So, what message does my right honourable friend have for Councillor Patel and all the campaigners, candidates and activists as we run into this festival of democracy, our local elections?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, can I share in my honourable friend's congratulations for all those in Bolton, but also my commiserations to those in Plymouth, especially actually our party chairman, who's an avid supporter of the Green Army. But most importantly, I welcome the election of Councillor Patel, and I look forward to him joining our other councillors in delivering for their local areas with less crime, lower council tax, and importantly, filling more potholes.
Mr. Carmichael. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Home Office announced that they would not be setting up a bespoke visa scheme for the fishing industry of the sort that is already available for people working in fish farms and in offshore wind farms. They also told skippers that crew previously employed by them under a temporary scheme had to stop working immediately. As a consequence of that announcement, in fishing ports around the coast today, many fishing boats are tied up, unable to go to sea. It's the only time the Home Secretary has been successful in our stated ambition of stopping the boats. The Prime Minister and his party promised our fishermen a sea of opportunity if they would support them. But what's the point of a sea of opportunity if you can't get crew to fish in it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure I recognise the characterisation that the honourable gentleman put forward. We are proud champions of the UK's fishing industry, not least with our £100 million investment in fishing communities, but when we're always looking to engage with them to make sure that they get the support they need. Crucially, all the opportunities that are there for them because of Brexit, we're keen to make sure that we deliver.
Jane Hunt.
Join me in thanking Lorna and Shirley of the Marios Tenente Centre and local churches in Loughborough for all their hard work in establishing a community allotment. Local people use the facility as a great place to get outdoors, as well as a relaxing place to be.
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to Lorna and Shirley for all their fantastic work? Allotments can do wonders, not just for, as she said, providing food, but also well-being and a place of sanctuary for people around the country, and they deserve enormous praise for creating one for the benefit of their community.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
Right, we come to the urgent question. Yvette Cooper.
To ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on secret police stations operating in the UK by the CCP.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ordinarily, my colleague, the Security Minister, would have responded to this question because it sits in his portfolio. He is, however, in Northern Ireland today, so they've asked me to respond in his place. Mr. Speaker, the latest reporting in the Times on the so-called overseas police stations are, of course, of great concern. As the Security Minister said in his previous statement on this matter in November last year, investigations by the law enforcement community are ongoing, which of course limits what I'm able to say in this House on a live investigation on a sensitive matter, as members of this House will of course appreciate. I don't want to say anything that would jeopardise any operational investigations or indeed any potential future prosecutions. I will, however, take this opportunity to reassure the House of this government's resolve to protect every community in this country from transnational repression. The protection of people in the United Kingdom is of the utmost importance. Any attempt to coerce, intimidate or illegally repatriate any individual will not be tolerated. This egregious activity is part of a wider trend of authoritarian governments, not just China, but others as well, perpetrating transnational repression in an effort to silence their critics overseas, undermine democracy and the rule of law, and further their own narrow geopolitical interests. Through our police forces and the intelligence agencies that work with them, we take a proactive approach, protecting individuals and communities from threats. Where we identify individuals who may be at heightened risk, we are front-footed in deploying protective security measures and guidance where necessary. The upcoming National Security Bill will strengthen our powers to deal with transnational repression and indeed agents of foreign states more generally. Coercion, harassment or intimidation linked to a foreign power will be criminalised under the new foreign interference offence in that bill. Existing criminal offences against a person, such as assault, will in future command higher sentences where they are undertaken at the behest of a foreign power through the state threats aggravating factor in that bill. The bill will also introduce a new foreign influence registration scheme, and we will not hesitate to use these new powers to bear down on the activities of foreign entities of concern. The National Security Bill will return to this House in early May, and I call on all members here to support it when it does. It is clear, however, that we can and must do more. That is why the Prime Minister asked my right honourable friend, the Security Minister, to lead a new Defending Democracy task force. A key priority of that task force is to enhance our response to transnational repression. That work is ongoing, and my right honourable friend, the Security Minister, will provide an update on that work to the House in due course. And it obviously builds on the work done by his predecessor as Security Minister, the right honourable member for East Hampshire, who I see is in his place. Mr. Speaker, I am clear, as is the rest of government, that the repression of communities in the UK will not be tolerated and must be stopped.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's reported in the Times this morning that a Chinese businessman linked to an alleged Chinese secret police station in London has attended Chinese Communist Party political conferences, is linked to the United Front Work Department, and has also organised Tory party fundraising dinners and attended events with Conservative Prime Ministers. These are very serious allegations, raise vital national security questions, and I think the Home Secretary should be here to answer this.
Exactly. Right.
The Director General of MI5 has warned about the Chinese authorities both trying to influence our politics and also running operations to monitor and intimidate the Chinese diaspora, including forcibly repatriating Chinese nationals. In November, we questioned the Security Minister about possible secret police stations in Croydon, Hendon and Glasgow. He provided no information but said he would come back with an update, and he has not done so. Nor has he met with my honourable friend, the member for Croydon Central, despite promising to do so. Other countries have taken visible action. This week, 2 men were arrested by the FBI in New York for suspected operations, and in the Netherlands, similar operations have been shut down. But here in the UK, we have heard nothing. No reports of arrests, no reassurance that these operations have been closed down. And instead, we're told one of the key individuals has been vice-chairman of the Chinese group fundraising for Conservative Association in the City of London and has attended party-organised events with 2 out of the last 3 Conservative Prime Ministers. So can he tell us the full extent of this individual's involvement with the Conservative Party and his contact with any government ministers and what action ministers and the party have taken? Can he tell us what they have done about the alleged secret police station in Croydon and elsewhere? Has its operations been closed down? Because the lack of answers will raise grave concerns that the government is not addressing the scale of this threat and is not updating Parliament for fear of party political embarrassment because of the connections with the Conservative Party. That is not good enough. Party political concerns must never, repeat, never, be put before our national security. The country deserves answers.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, the Shadow Home Secretary asked a number of questions in relation to the specific individual named in the Times today in connection with his activities in Croydon, which, as a Shadow Home Secretary, will appreciate, it's the borough that I represent in Parliament as well. It's of great concern to me as well as to the member for Croydon Central. What I can tell the House is that I've been briefed today, as you would expect, at short notice. It's not my ordinary ministerial portfolio. There is a live investigation by the law enforcement community into this matter, and as I said in my opening comments, I cannot comment on the details of such an investigation while it is live for reasons that will be obvious to all members of this House. As soon as the Security Minister is in a position to provide an update on the results of that investigation, he will do so, and I will also ask the Security Minister to privately brief the member for Croydon Central as soon as possible. It is worth mentioning that the Chinese activity in this area is not confined to the United Kingdom. We are aware of approximately 100 alleged stations of the kind we're discussing around the world. It's not unique to the United Kingdom. And as the Shadow Home Secretary said, just earlier this week, arrests were made in New York in connection with a similar investigation conducted by the FBI there, similar to the investigations that we are currently conducting here. In relation to party politics, look, I think all political parties need to be alert to the danger that representatives of hostile states seek to infiltrate or influence their activities. I think it's fair to say that there have been other members of this House that have been targeted similarly that we know about. So I would ask all members of Parliament and all political parties to be alert to this risk. I think all of us owe that to democracy.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I bring my honourable friend back to the real issue here? Investigations into individual transgressions, absolutely fine, they progress. The problem is that we have known in this House, the government has known for a considerable amount of time, raised by many of my colleagues, the activity of these particular 3 locations, illegal Chinese police stations. We know that they are bringing Chinese dissidents in. They are confronting them with videos of their families, threatening their families in front of them if they don't cooperate and leave and go back to China. We know that. The security services have warned the government about that. The question really here today is, why in heaven's name haven't we acted alongside the Americans, even the Dutch, and shut these stations down and kicked those people out of the country?
Look, I thank my right honourable friend for his question and for his long-standing campaigning on this issue and indeed the activities of China more widely, which are of great concern, rightly of great concern, to this government and to members of both sides of the House. The activity he described, interference with Chinese nationals in this country, is something we take incredibly seriously. We saw that terrible incident in Manchester not very long ago where members of the Chinese consular staff there dragged somebody, a Chinese national, inside or someone inside their compound, and as a consequence of that, 6 Chinese officials have now left the United Kingdom. The activity my honourable friend described is incredibly serious. It is unacceptable. It must and will be stopped. But in relation to those 3 particular locations he referenced, because they are the subject of a live investigation and live work by the law enforcement community, I'm afraid I can't say any more from the dispatch box today, but as soon as my right honourable friend the Security Minister can provide an update, he will do so.
Come to SNP spokesperson Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The SNP welcomed the inclusion of a standalone China section in the Integrated Review 2023, and I agree with the Minister that this is a threat that we must take seriously, and that the Government should be giving as much, if not more, attention to influence of Chinese state actors as that coming via Putin's oligarchs. This is not the first time that this has been raised in this House, so can I ask the Minister if he's able to provide any update at all on these secret Chinese state police stations? Can he assure us that he is not just waiting for the National Security Bill to go through before action can be taken? Can he reassure me that he or the Security Minister, perhaps more appropriately, has had communications with his counterparts in the Scottish Government and Police Scotland? And given that that one of these alleged secret police stations is in my Glasgow Central constituency, can I also have an update from ministers on this situation? Because I was promised one by him verbally in the past and have not had that update. Yeah, and he's not here today to answer to it, so I don't want to put him on the spot with that, but that is very concerning. Can he also tell me what reassurance he can provide to Scotland's Chinese community, some of whom may have good reason to fear Chinese state interference and the secret police that may be operating? And can he reassure us that there will be some action forthcoming, because it doesn't feel as though there's been terribly much action thus far?
Here.
Okay, well, first of all, I will, on his behalf, recommit the Security Minister to meet with the Honourable Lady, along with, obviously, the member for Croydon Central. Given one of these locations is in her constituency, I think it is important the Security Minister does meet her to discuss it. So, on his behalf, I make that commitment now, and I'll talk to the Security Minister later on today to reiterate the importance of that meeting taking place for all the reasons the Honourable Lady quite rightly points to. Look, I completely agree with the point she makes. This kind of activity, intimidation or potential intimidation of foreign nationals on our soil, whether it's by people acting for parts of the Chinese state or indeed other states, it's not just the Chinese state, we've seen it with other countries as well, Iran being an obvious example. It's completely unacceptable. We have zero tolerance for this kind of activity. It is under active investigation. It is not true to say no action is being taken. In relation to these particular sites, action is currently being taken, but members will understand why I can't go into the details of that work just at the moment. And just to reassure the House, action can be taken and will be taken under the law as it stands, but the National Security Bill updates and increases the powers we have available to us. For example, requiring registration and giving us more power to act against those people who are acting on behalf of foreign states. And I do just encourage all members to support that bill and in the other place, get it through Parliament and onto the statute books as fast as we can, because those extra powers do help us in this area.
Mark Pritchard.
Can I agree with my right honourable friend that the National Security Bill will make this country safer against state threats and indeed make political dissidents in this country, North Korea, Russian or Chinese, safer as well? Does he agree with me, though, that when it comes to national security, that it should not be a party political football, and by definition, when there are ongoing cases, that they should not be discussed in this House, and in particular, where there are classified elements to these cases?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right in the comments that he makes. I think matters of national security are issues that should be tackled on a bipartisan or tripartisan across the House basis. All democratic political parties in the Western world more widely, but including the United Kingdom, are at risk from inappropriate influence. All of us must work together to combat and exclude that risk. And I think we should approach these issues in that spirit of cross-party cooperation.
No. Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm perplexed and my constituents are very concerned. Back at the start of November, we had the urgent question where the Minister said there was an investigation. He would come back as soon as possible to the House to report. He promised to meet with me. I've emailed the Minister multiple times. I've even texted him, and I've had nothing. And now we read that there might be links between the man who supposedly in Croydon is responsible for this, who has links to the Chinese Communist Party and links to the Conservative Party. Was the Minister's failure to respond to me multiple times discourtesy, or is there something else?
Look, I think that insinuation of party political influence is frankly a disgraceful slur, and I think frankly the Honourable Lady is not doing Croydon residents a service by attempting to ask the question in the way that she just did. I do know, because I've asked him, the Security Minister has never met or encountered the gentleman concerned. He does, however, owe the member for Croydon Central an update, as I said in response to the Shadow Home Secretary, and I will make sure the Security Minister meets both with the member for Croydon Central and the Honourable Member for Glasgow Central extremely quickly to provide an update on this issue.
Sir Michael Penning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a former police minister myself, I think it's very, very important that Parliament stays out of an ongoing investigation. I think that is absolutely vital. But what I am particularly worried about is that if we just kick these people out of the country and don't prosecute them and put them in British prisons, when they get back to China, we give them a medal, not actually the criminal prosecution that they deserve in this country. So can we make sure if there is a criminal act that's taken place, they prosecute this country and not just kicked out, because the Chinese will love that and they'll give them medals and God knows what else.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. He's absolutely right in the point he made at the beginning, as a former police minister himself, about the importance of not commenting in this House on particularly sensitive live investigations that are being undertaken. I completely agree with the point he made, his second point, about the importance of prosecuting people domestically in the UK, and if they've committed a criminal offence here in the UK, making sure they serve a sentence here in the UK prior to getting kicked out. There needs to be a very clear deterrent, making it clear to those people thinking about doing these things that it is unacceptable on our soil. We will not tolerate it.
And Jarvis.
Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to hear the Minister say that these are matters that should be addressed on a cross-party basis. And the Security Minister, who I hold in the highest regard, said that the Defending Democracy Task Force would be cross-party, and that was something that was welcomed by the Director-General of MI5. So can I ask the Minister to confirm that that is still the case, and if it is, presumably either the Security Minister or himself or his department will be reaching out to our front bench in the very near future?
Well, I certainly share your members' sentiments about the cross-party nature of this. I will take that point back to my honourable friend, the Security Minister, and put it to him later on today, as soon as he gets back from Northern Ireland.
I am exasperated that 6 months after I held an urgent question on this issue, it is still true. There are 4 illegal police stations that we know of operating in the country. The one in Belfast seems to be missing from much of the reporting. There is no question that when we are vulnerable at home to Chinese transnational repression, I hope the Minister is listening, we are weaker on the world stage and less able to... Does the Minister wish to respond already? We are weaker on the world stage. This is a transnational crisis, and I have just met with Vahid Beheshti, who is on day 56 of hunger strike outside the Foreign Office because of the IRGC failing to be prescribed despite the promise to do so. When will the Home Office close the IRGC cutouts operating in Maida Vale, Wilston and Manchester, as well as at least the 4 Chinese police operating stations, because other countries have acted, so why haven't we?
I can assure the Honourable Lady I was listening extremely carefully to what she was saying. She asserted in her question that these locations were still operating. She is making, if I may say, an assumption in making that assertion. Not an assumption I'm going to comment on, because it is a matter of a live investigation, as she will appreciate. As soon as the Security Minister is able to comment on this matter, he will come to the House and do so. As she will also appreciate, I can't comment either on the IRGC, because ministers don't comment, as she knows, on matters being considered around prescription of that nature. What I can say and will say is that this government takes interference with foreign nationals here, transnational intimidation, extremely seriously. It is completely unacceptable, and we will do whatever is necessary to stop it from happening.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anybody who has the right to be here has the right to feel safe and secure in being here. In the last couple of years, to their credit, the government has allowed in excess of 100,000 Hong Kongers to move to this country. But we know that the intimidation and the persecution has followed them. In universities up and down the country, they are shouted down and they continue to be intimidated. These police stations are part of the infrastructure that enables that. To borrow a phrase from the Foreign Secretary, isn't it time that we should be pulling down the shutters on them?
Very good. Minister.
Well, I completely agree with what the honourable gentleman just said. And in particular in relation to the British national overseas Hong Kong citizens who have come here, we have extended a very warm welcome to those people who are at risk of repression in Hong Kong now because of the Chinese Communist Party's brutal repression of democratic freedoms and other freedoms in Hong Kong, which this government abhors in the strongest terms. That's why we've offered refuge to those people here. And it is quite right, the honourable gentleman is quite right to say that foreign nationals residing in this country, regardless of their immigration status, should enjoy all of the rights and freedoms around free speech and freedom from intimidation that we would expect any citizen of this country to enjoy. And I agree with him, it's the duty of government and the law enforcement services and agencies to ensure those freedoms and rights are protected, and that includes on campuses. I think there's some work the DfE are doing in this area where Chinese nationals are students at universities. They should be free from harassment and intimidation. The same applies, of course, to other groups of people, Jewish students being another obvious example. And I would just say it's vital that university authorities take robust action to protect their students, whether they're Chinese, Jewish or from any other group, from any sort of intimidation on campuses, which is totally unacceptable.
Bob Seeley.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his robust line, and I thank ministers for all the work they're trying to do. I think it is true to say that in the last 10, 15, 20 years, I think collective governments have been slow and naive in dealing with these more nuanced, politicised threats from Iran, and Russia and China, etc. My question, I get the fact that they're making transnational repression illegal, and I get the fact that there is an ongoing police case. But the point has already been made. Repression is already illegal in this country and has been for centuries. People have the right to be to the freedoms of this nation, whether they are visitors or citizens. We know who these diplomats are. We don't have to wait for a court case. We're not going to be imprisoning Chinese diplomats. We don't have to wait for a court case before we start expelling diplomats who are engaged in these practices. And I think that is the point that myself and others are trying to make here today. Thank you.
There is no reluctance to ensure that diplomats engaged in inappropriate activity will leave. I've mentioned already that 6 officials who were based at the Chinese consular office in Manchester have now left the United Kingdom. In relation to the gentleman in Croydon, the subject of the Times article today, he is of course not a diplomat and therefore is susceptible to prosecution in the normal way, exactly as the former police minister was describing earlier, and that is exactly why there is an ongoing investigation that's taking place.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. What specific measures will higher education institutions be encouraged, or even, if it's necessary, legislation to protect particularly BNO passport holders, but also young Iranian students, young Russian and Ukrainian students who feel under surveillance, and where there are actually other students within the student body who are there under a sort of surveillance pact? We know this has been happening for quite some time, and the government's response has been tardy. Could he undertake today to meet with the Higher Education Minister and to share immediate advice following today's news so that we can have a reassurance that all international students are safe?
Well, I completely agree with her sentiment that international students, indeed any students at UK universities, should be free from intimidation, a point I made in response to a previous question. Whether those are Chinese students, Iranian students, Jewish students or anyone else, they should not be getting intimidated. And I would just repeat the point I made earlier, that individual universities, first and foremost, should be ensuring in the first instance, the safety of students on their campuses. In relation to her question about action by DfE, as members will appreciate, I'm straying quite a long way beyond the limits of my ministerial responsibility by answering this question already. Going into DfE goes even further. What I will say is that I'll ask the Security Minister to come back to the member for Hornsey and Wood Green specifically on that point and update her in writing on what work he is doing with DfE to ensure the safety of students on campuses. It is a vital question. It is appropriate that the government get involved as well as leaving it to universities, and I'm going to ask him to come back to her on that very important point. But I completely agree with the sentiment of her question.
Simon Slough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These illegal police stations form part of a pattern whereby China is an adversary of freedom the world over. And we saw that recently over her intimidation of Taiwan. We see it in her treatment of Hong Kongers. We see it in her actions in Africa to try and act through debt bondage to secure advantage on that continent. When will the government designate China, as we should, as a formal threat to the interests of the United Kingdom in our security architecture?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I mean, I do agree with the thrust of his thesis that clearly the Chinese Communist Party is seeking to project its influence around the world in a way that often undermines the interests of the recipients of that interest and often undermines the interests of those countries who believe in freedom and who believe in democracy. And I think we do have a duty in this country, acting with our allies in the free world, to make sure that that influence is circumscribed. Clearly, we are taking more powers domestically, for example, through the National Security and Investment Act, which came into force just over a year ago to seek to limit influences in the investment and economic sphere. We're doing work with partners around the world as well. We're supporting countries where freedom is threatened, including, of course, Taiwan, who we strongly, obviously, support in their right to choose their own destiny. The question he specifically raises is obviously a complicated one, and I think one probably better dealt with by higher powers than me, but I think I've made pretty clear in my answer my feelings on the topic of our relations with China.
Emma Hardy.
On how many occasions have the government or governmental officials discussed the use of these police stations with the Chinese embassy?
I'm afraid, not being a Foreign Office Minister or the Security Minister, I don't know, but I'm sure the Security Minister will update on that when he next comes to the House.
The Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his answers today. This is a very difficult area and he's constrained because of the ongoing investigation. But can he reassure me that the authorities that are making all these investigations do have all the resources they need to do this? Because that will be reassuring to the people of South Derbyshire.
Yes, I can provide the Honourable Lady with the assurance that she requires. We do take this as a government incredibly seriously. We don't think the operation of these facilities is remotely acceptable. We don't think the intimidation of foreign nationals on our soil is remotely acceptable either. And so the relevant law enforcement bodies do have the resources necessary to protect people on British soil, as this House and the Honourable Lady rightly expect.
So, Chemi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, Coventry hosted a friendship festival to welcome Hong Kong nationals under the BNO scheme. Now, I'm proud of the city's diversity, but existence of Chinese police station poses a direct threat to my constituents. Now, the government's own backbenchers have said that this government is asleep at the wheel when it comes to threats posed by China. So, given that this is a matter of national security, what steps will the Minister take to ensure the safety of my constituents in Coventry North West?
Minister?
Yeah, well, look, I don't accept the suggestion that the government has been asleep at the wheel. There's a whole range of actions being taken to counter foreign state threats. I've mentioned the National Security and Investments Act, the National Security Bill, the integrated review that puts national security at its heart, and the Defending Democracy Task Force, which the Security Minister is chairing, all designed to keep not just BNOs, but others safe as well. And on the topic of BNOs, I think that actually does illustrate this country, the United Kingdom, at its best. We sometimes hear people on the other side say that we don't have safe and legal routes, or we don't extend a warm welcome. Well, the over 100,000 British national overseas from Hong Kong that we have welcomed with open arms, the 24,000 people we've welcomed from Afghanistan via safe and legal routes, the 25,000 people that came from Syria under the UK resettlement scheme and other schemes, and more than 200,000 people that have come from Ukraine, all illustrate what an open and welcoming country this is, and the approach that this government takes to genuine and legitimate refugees.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It isn't just nefarious activity from the Chinese Communist Party through the so-called police stations in this country and other parts of the world, but it's also their commercial activities and their activities in academia that are a threat to our national security. BGI is a company that is harvesting genomic information from people around the world, for example, through prenatal tests. Can I have an assurance from the government that the Defending Democracy Task Force won't just be looking at the so-called Chinese police stations operating in this country, but all of those aggressive acts that have been carried out by the Communist Chinese state?
Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend, the member for Crawley, is absolutely right to draw attention to what the Chinese government is doing in seeking to infiltrate academia and certain sensitive technologies. I saw this at first hand during my time as technology minister, and I must say to the House, I was deeply concerned by what I saw. The channel, the machinery of government for dealing with that isn't the Defending Democracy Task Force. There are various other arms of government dealing with that. The powers that exist under the National Security and Investment Act give the government, I think in the first instance it's what used to be the Base Secretary, powers to take action, and I can assure the honourable gentleman the government is very alive to this. I saw it when I was Tech Minister, and I can assure him that the government is vigilant, it is alert, and action is being taken.
Jim Shallow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his responses to the questions? But can I ask him, will the Minister outline what steps have been taken to secure the safety of Chinese expats within the United Kingdom who are frightened of the reach of the Chinese government arms in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? I have some constituents, Chinese expats, who have told me they feel that they've been followed. They're pretty sure that their phones have been tapped. So what assurance can I give to my Chinese constituents about their privacy, about their security and about their safety?
Well, I appreciate the question that the member for Strangford asked there. I would just strongly urge him that if there are particular constituency cases he's aware of where individual constituents feel they're being in any way targeted, I would just very strongly urge him and his constituents to contact the police, I guess the PSNI in the first instance, who can then of course escalate the matter if required. Please do report that quickly. I'd say the same in fact to any member of this House, so they can be quick, and I can assure him those matters will be quickly investigated, action taken as well.
Jackie Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The constituency of Meriden has become home to many people from Hong Kong. Can the Minister reassure my constituents that we take our moral duty to protect political dissidents very seriously, and they should be free from harassment from any inch of UK soil? And of course, I don't just mean from Chinese police stations, but also from IRGC cutouts as well.
Yeah, well, my honourable friend makes an extremely important point. It's a long-standing principle in this country that we will ensure the freedoms and the rights of all of those who reside on our soil. We will protect them from threats to their freedom by whoever those might be perpetrated, including and perhaps even especially foreign states. So my honourable friend made a very important point, and he is absolutely right to make it.
Michael Fabricant.
I thank the right honourable lady opposite for tabling this urgent question, though I do doubt whether the Chinese community will be thanking her after she made her cheap political point, which rather spoiled the questions that she was asking. But my right honourable friend will be aware that it's not just foreign actors like China who are active in this country, but also those of Iran. What does my right honourable friend think that he can do to protect journalists who seek to criticise correctly not only the regime in China, but also that which is happening in Tehran and the rest of Iran?
Well, I firstly associate myself with the comment made at the beginning of the Honourable Member for Lichfield's question just then. In relation to press freedom, it is, of course, a long-standing, centuries-old principle in this country that the press are free and should be free from interference, including interference by foreign states, and that includes, of course, Iran. We are actually at the moment working very closely with, I suspect, the Iranian media outlet that was targeted shockingly and shamefully and disgracefully by the Iranian regime to ensure that they can and will continue to operate from UK soil, as they are perfectly entitled to do.
We now come to the statements. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I would like to make a statement to update the House on the infected blood inquiry. The Government welcomes the publication of the infected blood inquiry's second interim report. I'd like to thank Sir Brian Langstaff and all those who have contributed. The infected blood inquiry has done a huge amount of work on an intensely complex issue, ensuring that victims' voices are heard. I've been deeply moved by the testimonies outlined in the latest report, and the victims' bravery in coming forward should not be overlooked. The issuing of the second interim report, specifically on compensation, was not anticipated by the Government until we were informed by the inquiry in February this year. However, we very much appreciate and welcome Sir Brian taking this approach. The Government is considering intensely the recommendations outlined in this report, and work is underway at pace across all relevant departments to respond fully. My right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, announced the infected blood inquiry in 2017 to examine the circumstances that led to individuals being given contaminated blood and blood products in the UK. The inquiry, chaired by Sir Brian Langstaff, commenced on the 2nd of July 2018, and I'd like to reiterate our total endorsement for my right honourable friend's point that the contaminated blood scandal of the 70s and 80s should simply never have happened. In tandem with the ongoing inquiry, my right honourable friend, the member for Portsmouth North, as the then Paymaster General, commissioned Sir Robert Francis KC to produce a compensation framework study in anticipation of a recommendation from the inquiry to set up a compensation scheme. The findings of this study were published in June 2022. Shortly after this, Sir Brian published his first interim report of the affected blood inquiry in July 2022. In his report, Sir Brian recommended that the Government make interim payments to infected individuals and their bereaved partners. The Government accepted this recommendation in full on the 17th of August 2022, and interim compensation payments of £100,000 have been paid to those infected individuals and their bereaved partners registered with existing support schemes. As I said to the House in December, we have much to do, and I wish to assure the House that this is a priority for the Government and we will continue to progress it. Those are my words in December, and I would like to assure the House that this commitment absolutely remains. Sir Brian's most recent report sets out what the inquiry recommends as an appropriate means of compensating both those infected and affected, and the mechanism for delivering that compensation. In doing so, it sets out the complexity of what is a multi-layered issue. The recommendations in his report outline that those infected and affected should be granted legal support, and infected and affected people and the estates of infected people should be able to claim for categories of loss against 5 awards: Injury Impact Award, Social Impact Award, Autonomy Award, Care Award and Financial Loss Award. This is rather than claiming on individual assessment of each application. In addition, those dissatisfied with their compensation payments should have redress through an appeal to a structure outside of the compensation scheme. The report has also proposed mechanisms Sir Brian thinks would ensure the fairness of the compensation scheme. He has recommended that a scheme is administered by an arm's-length body, chaired by a High Court judge or equivalent, and advised by legal and medical professionals, as well as the beneficiaries of the scheme. In addition to this, Sir Brian has proposed that the route through the courts should still remain open to beneficiaries. Sir Brian has agreed with much of Sir Robert's study, though there are also differences in approach. For example, Sir Robert outlined in his study that the scheme should be delivered locally in each of the 4 nations, as this was the preference of the victims. Sir Brian has recommended that the scheme is delivered by a central body, whilst continuing the support provided by the existing infected blood support schemes, which should be continued and guaranteed for life by legislation or secure government undertaking. There is also divergence in the consideration of scope of those eligible for compensation payments, including the extension of payments to those with hepatitis B and not providing payments to the estates of those affected. Sir Brian's interim report is detailed. It is only right that the government will need to consider the complexities they set out thoroughly when preparing our response. The House will recognise that health is a devolved matter, and I will be discussing the report with my colleagues in the devolved administrations. As I said at the start of my statement, the Government welcomes the publication of the Infected Blood Inquiry's second interim report to assist its ongoing work. However, we do not underestimate the complexity of these recommendations, which do need careful consideration. For example, Sir Brian recommends that an arm's-length body, in which His Majesty's Government would have no ongoing role beyond providing taxpayer funds as required by the body. On anything like this scale, this would be a new departure, and does have implications for accountability of government, which will need careful consideration alongside how its financial implications will be managed. I would, however, like to reassure the House that while the government is progressing work to ensure that we are in the best possible position to respond fully at the end of the inquiry, every recommendation by Sir Brian, including in relation to timing and a further interim payment, is receiving intense focus. My colleagues in the Department for Health and Social Care are aware of the issues Sir Brian has raised in relation to psychological support. Under the current psychological support scheme for England, there is provision for a grant of up to £900 a year for established beneficiaries and family members for counselling and talking therapy. The Department for Health and Social Care is undertaking research to look at the psychological support needs so that decisions on commissioning of bespoke service are based on robust evidence and meet the requirement. In closing, I would like to reiterate the need for pace. People die every week as a result of the impact of the scandal. This government wants to deliver resolution, and we are working at pace across all relevant departments to consider the recommendations as outlined in this latest report and to ensure we are best placed to respond to the inquiry's final report. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Paymaster General for providing an advanced copy of his statement. I'd like to begin by paying tribute to the brave victims and their families who, whilst working through their own personal ill health, grief and trauma, have campaigned tirelessly for justice. Without their strength, we would not have reached this stage. And of course to my right honourable friend, the member for Kingston upon Hull North, who's been a stalwart of the success of this campaign so far. The continued work of the Infected Blood Inquiry is crucial to ensuring that victims' voices are heard. I had the privilege of meeting with victims of this scandal last month, and their stories will stay with me forever. No one should have to experience the pain and anguish they have faced and are still facing. Justice delayed, continuing to be delayed, is justice denied. While we await the conclusion of the report and inquiry, those who are given contaminated blood products are dying at a rate of 1 every 4 days. Families have suffered decades of health issues, financial loss and stigma. Victims, those affected and infected, will have watched the Minister's statement today with heavy hearts and disappointment and some degree of anger. There seems to be no commitment from the Minister to respond to the second report until the final report is published in the autumn. The interim report was published so that the government doesn't have to wait and to take action until the final report. Whilst we all understand the complexities of this scandal, I hope the Minister can see that many individuals directly affected still feel angry and unrecognised. Today's statement does not provide any certainty for families or children of victims. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have 5 questions for the Minister to finish with. First, does he agree with Sir Brian's statement in the interim report that time without redress is harmful? No time must be wasted in delivering that redress. And can he confirm that the intense focus that he's talked about being done now is to achieve the recommendation in the report that The scheme is set up now and should begin work this year. Second, how can he provide more reassurance to family members of victims, including parents who lost children and children orphaned when their parents died? Third, the Paymaster General talked about work underway. If the government plans to accept these interim findings, officials must start now verifying, registering directly affected people and their families urgently to understand the size of the group and to speed up the payments. Can he confirm whether this is already taking place? Fourth, will he commit to more regular updates on the progress and direction of travel on this issue ahead of the inquiry's final report later this year? We shouldn't have to keep squeezing this information out of the government because it compounds the pain of the victims. And finally, will he agree to meet with me and my right honourable friend, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, so that we can work together to deliver the justice the victims deserve?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her remarks. She was right to pay tribute to many MPs in this House, including the Right Honourable Lady and my Right Honourable friend, who have really campaigned tirelessly on this over a long period of time. I'm grateful for the work of the APPG. And I'd also actually mention some of the members of the media who've actually been absolutely at the forefront of pushing this for a long period of time. But above all, the Honourable Lady is right to refer to the victims. And I know, I'm very conscious of the fact that there will be tens of thousands of people watching this statement today who are desperate to see a resolution of this. Every time there is another iteration, every time there is a cause for me to be in this place, it is a source of anxiety and of concern and of worry and of, I'm afraid, I'm sure, disappointment every time there is another statement and we don't have the final resolution. What I would say is we've travelled a long way. So it was 6 years ago this was announced. It was 5 years ago that Sir Brian started work. I'm very, very grateful to Sir Brian for producing this interim report. A lot of it is very similar to Sir Robert Francis' report, though there are differences. We do need to do the work. So on the points that the Honourable Lady raises, we've been focused on ensuring that at the conclusion of Sir Brian's inquiry, we're able to come forward in the very best place, the best place possible to do it. That does not preclude doing something earlier if we are able and have the means to do it. Registration is not as yet taking place, but I'm absolutely mindful of the fact that whereas for the previous interim payment there was a defined set of people and bereaved partners, were that recommendation to be taken forward, that requires registration, and that inevitably takes time, as we are all aware. I absolutely will continue to, although honourable members and right honourable members will be aware that this is no more than an update statement. I was keen to come to this House to hear the views of honourable members, and I commit to do so again as appropriate as we continue through this process, and work will continue. And of course it would be a pleasure to meet the Honourable Lady and the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy if they'd like to meet to discuss this.
Chair of the Health Select Committee, Steve Bryan.
Thank you very much. In his second interim report, Sir Brian Langstaff makes it clear that the government has everything it needs to implement the compensation framework now, and to repeat the Shadow Minister's quote that she's pulled out from the report, very pertinent: time without redress is harmful. I would suggest that is rather underplaying it. Time without redress, people are passing away. Currently, Madam Deputy Speaker, these infected blood support schemes make regular ex gratia payments to those who are infected and bereaved partners. Will the government make this provision statutory?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the question, and I don't dispute for a second the comments that have been of Sir Brian that has been referred to by my honourable friend and the honourable lady, that time without redress is harmful. We want to see progress on this, which is why we are working at pace to deliver it. Sir Brian makes a specific recommendation that the ongoing ex gratia payments should be put on a statutory basis or receive a similarly strong government commitment. I'm not in a position to respond to recommendations today. It's been 8 working days since the report landed, but all of these recommendations will be taken very seriously.
SNP spokesperson Martin Day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I put on the record my gratitude for advance sight of the statement today and also for the work of the Infected Blood Inquiry. I suspect there will be a considerable amount of consensus in the House on this issue. I have, over the years, been appalled at the personal testimony I've heard from my constituents, their 40 years of struggle, and the realisation that this scandal could have affected any one of us. It is a tragedy which simply should never have happened, and it has been made worse by decades of delay, first in preventing further use of contaminated factor products, in identifying victims, and then in delivering compensation. And as we know, the infected blood scandal took place before devolution, while healthcare in Scotland was the responsibility of the UK Government, and the financial powers to deliver compensation still lie with Westminster. It is entirely appropriate to therefore have a scheme delivered by a central body, as recommended by the inquiry. Over the years, there have simply been too many delays and denials impacting victims and their families. As Sir Brian Langstaff, he's absolutely spot on when he says in the interim report, and we've heard this a couple of times already today, but I make no apology for repeating it, time without redress is harmful, no time must be wasted in delivering that redress. It is therefore imperative that the recommendations to widen the interim compensation payments are carried out, and this should be done before the final compensation scheme is set up. So will the UK Government accept the recommendation of the inquiry that the interim compensation payments be widened and delivered without delay? And finally, when will the Compensation Systems Independent Chair be appointed? Can we have a detailed timescale for this?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his comments, and can I also thank him particularly for him welcoming the concept of a central body. That was an area of not dispute, but I think there was a slightly different emphasis placed between Sir Robert's report and Sir Brian's report as whether it should be delivered locally through each of the 4 schemes or through a UK scheme. The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. This happened in the 70s and 80s, long before devolution, and there's a clear recommendation from Sir Brian, which I'm glad to hear that the Honourable Gentleman endorses. He raises 2 points about the interim compensation payment being widened and there being no delay in its implementation, and also regarding the appointments of individuals. This all depends on the Government's response to each of those recommendations. The Honourable Gentleman will accept that. There are a number of things that could be done, though, to speed up the process. If we were to go down the route, if we were to agree with Sir Brian's recommendation to have an ALB, there are mechanisms whereby individuals could be appointed on an interim basis prior to the ALB being formally constituted. And all of this is in the mix as we work through our response to his report.
Father of the House, Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, the main views from the All-Party Group will come from the Right Honourable Lady. Can I say to the Minister, we recognise there's going to be a great deal of work that needs to go into this. As a minimum, can I put to him that he should come back to the House before the summer break to say how far the Government has got in considering recommendations and which ones they're going to accept? Can I ask him if he'll set up a register so those who think they will have claims to make can both put their names forward and be able to receive updates from Government directly rather than just through the mainstream media? And can I say to him that the voices of former Secretary of State for Health, that the totality has been a failure by the British state, and that the pain and suffering has gone on far too long, are words endorsed right across the House and by the country as a whole, and that we want the action that Sir Brian Langstaff has asked for, which is the scheme should be set up this year.
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend, and I thank him for recognising that there is a great deal of work to be done, which there is. I've already referred to the register point. Were we to adopt the recommendation, which is a very clear recommendation from Sir Brian, about an interim payment, which goes more widely than the last scheme, that does require a registration scheme, and I appreciate that that would take time itself, so that needs to be established at a very early stage if that recommendation is accepted. I will come back and update the House. I will do so as is appropriate. I hope that would certainly involve before the summer break.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for making the statement today. But really, after thousands have died, decades of campaigning, A 5-year public inquiry with over 500 people dying during that 5-year period. A review of compensation frameworks by Sir Robert Francis delivered to the government last February. A first interim report from Sir Brian Langstaff, and now a second interim report from Sir Brian Langstaff setting out the clear case for compensation. Enough is enough. Sir Brian Langstaff is very clear in his report. He says the scheme need not await the final report to begin work. It will clearly take political will to act quickly, but the circumstances here warrant it. So can the Minister explain to me and the thousands of people who will be watching this statement this afternoon, what exactly is the problem? Why isn't there the political will from this government to deliver justice to this group of people?
Minister.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady. She has been a constant and incredibly effective champion for those affected and infected. It was about time, but it was this government that did institute this inquiry. We've made a huge amount of progress in having an inquiry, in having very clear recommendations on compensation coming from Sir Brian. We want to act at pace and we want to act swiftly, but it's also vital that this is done properly. So there is a huge amount of work. The nature of the report, the recommendations that Sir Brian makes, they are unprecedented for an unprecedented circumstance. But that does require detailed work and detailed analysis. We will bring forward a response as soon as we can. I say we are focused on the inquiry's conclusion. That doesn't preclude coming forward before that if we are able to do so and if we decide that that is the right course of action.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my voice to those thanking Sir Brian Langstaff and the whole team for the work that they've done? We all recognise the complexities of delivering a scheme that's effective. And I'm grateful to the Minister for repeatedly coming to this House and committing to come to the House again. But will he repeat from the dispatch box the moral case for compensation, which effectively has bound the government to act and to follow the recommendations for compensation, whilst of course it takes time to put that into practice? What it is vital, I think, for people to hear today is that, in principle, the government is going to make this happen, because for many years that commitment was not there, and it needs to be repeated now.
Minister.
Yes. My right honourable friend speaks with a great deal of knowledge on this subject, and I'm very grateful. I repeat this, as did he. I'm very grateful to Sir Brian for producing a comprehensive and thorough appraisal of what the compensation scheme should look like. We need to go through that in detail. As my right honourable friend would accept, it needs to be effective, it needs to work. But I'm pleased that he's given me the opportunity to reiterate what I said last December in this place, that we fully accept there is a moral case for compensation in this circumstance. Absolutely.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I've said in the debate in 2017, I remember as a young surgeon when this scandal began to break in the early 80s, 40 years ago. Yeah. My entire medical career has passed while people have been fighting for justice and recognition. Yeah. And dragging that out has added financial hardship to the suffering that people were already going through. So as the Honourable Lady from Hull North, I think, said, enough is enough. Mm-hmm. So the Minister has talked about how long things will take, and we recognise that. But when will they start? When will registration of bereaved parents and children start? Yes. When will the framework actually start, so that people can expect, as Sir Brian Langstaff called for, that they would see action this year, not waiting any longer?
Minister?
The Honourable Lady is very clear, as is Sir Brian in his report. So there's no dispute as to what Sir Brian is recommending. I can't give that commitment now. There are processes across government, as the Honourable Lady will understand. We are working at pace. We are going through the report in great detail. As I say, it's been a short period of time since that report landed with us and on all of us, and It is detailed, it is comprehensive, and it does need work. But we will be coming back to the Honourable Lady and to this House.
Sir Mike Penning.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first shadow portfolio I had in 2006 was the Shadow Health Minister with this portfolio. So I met many of the victims straight away that had been crying out. The 80s is when this started, but actually we didn't really know until into the 90s what was creating it. And I'm no expert on this, but that's the sort of thing that was coming forward. So I'm very proud that this government has done something that I promised as the Minister what we would do to those victims, but it's been taken too long. If there is a moral position for this, the victims out there are still suffering. Their loved ones are suffering if they've lost their loved one. And it's not just financial, it's actually broken people's hearts and minds as well. But their scepticism on this, I think, might be also fuelled by the fact that the government initiated an inquiry by Baroness Cumberledge into the Primavos debacle and disaster, and the government ignored that, literally ignored their own inquiry. So can the Minister understand the concerns of victims and other members of this House that are a little bit sceptical about delay?
Minister.
My right honourable friend he's absolutely right. This has been a long-term scandal. It started in the 70s and 80s. It has been many years to get to this stage. But the stage we've now got to is a High Court judge, a very distinguished High Court judge, has spent 5 years working through the circumstances. He is at an advanced stage with his inquiry, and he has produced a thorough report on compensation. As I've said to this House, and I will say it again, the moral case for compensation is fully accepted by the government. We do need to go through this and work through exactly what the implications are, which are multiple. And this is, as I said before, this is an unprecedented circumstance which requires unprecedented means of redress, and that is what's reflected in the report. But it does require work to get through it.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had the report set out by Sir Brian Langstaff that says how the compensation should be delivered, the framework for delivering it. The Minister has said that the government is considering this recent report at pace, and he has also said that he wants to come back and update the House. So if we're moving at pace and we have all the detail in place that we need, when is he going to come back to the House?
Minister.
It will be a great pleasure to return to the House with more substance when I can. I thought it was important, even though we have only received this comprehensive report 8 working days ago, to give members of this House an opportunity to share their views on that interim report at the earliest possible opportunity. But the honourable gentleman will realise that it does require work to come back substantively to say which recommendations are being accepted and how we would be progressing it.
James Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister's statement? But would he agree with me that, notwithstanding the complexity that he outlined in relation to the compensation scheme, that 2 things should happen? One is that the government should move urgently to the design of the compensation scheme. And secondly, in the design of the compensation scheme, there should be engagement with victims or the groups representing those victims to make sure that there is alignment between the compensation scheme and the expectation of victims moving forward.
Minister.
I totally understand where my honourable friend is coming from. It is critical that we produce that answers provided to in response to this report are ones that have that are readily understood and have the buy-in of all those who've suffered so grievously as a result of these scandals. I'm very keen to engage with the victims. I would also say that Sir Brian, I think, has been doing an exceptional job in ensuring that he fully understands and speaks and takes on board the comments made by the victims and engages with them. It is, I think, impossible for any of us who have not suffered from this ourselves personally to understand fully the anguish that those victims have been put through. I think Sir Brian has done his utmost to reflect that in the report that is produced.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And yes, I'd also like to thank the Minister for coming here today and pay tribute to Sir Brian and the work that he has done. Not long after I was first elected in 2017, I received a letter from a constituent whose family had suffered as a result of the infected blood scandal, and what they had been through was heartbreaking. And although progress has been made, and we have the interim report, we are now 6 years further on, and they are no further on in receiving compensation. So as others have said today, can we please get on with it and ensure that these families' suffering is put to an end?
Minister.
Look, I totally understand where the Honourable Lady is coming from, that we all have constituents who are in that situation. There are tens of thousands of people who are affected across the whole of the UK. We want to do so at pace. We also want to do so with the scheme that is, that any scheme we adopt must be effective and must work and must be appropriate. So there is work ongoing. We will get there and report back to the House our response to those recommendations that Sir Brian has made.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister's intense focus on this, but can I join members from across the House, not on a personal basis, because I think the Minister is one of the best in the government, but on behalf of my constituents, that this has taken a long time, and of course it has to be thorough, and I'd like to put on record my thanks to Sir Brian and Sir Robert, but can the Minister assure the House that their difference of opinion about how the compensation may or may not be delivered, whether nationally or through the devolved administrations, will not cause further delay, that post the final report being published, there won't then be a further consultation on whether it's devolved or national, and in particular on children affected who've lost loved ones and parents, whether there could be interim payments more quickly, because some of them are really suffering financially, let alone the loss of their parents. And on the 5 categories, he mentioned social impact. Clearly the loss of a parent is the biggest social impact of all.
Minister.
To reassure my honourable friend, when I referred in my statement to areas where there were different nuances, different views presented by Sir Robert and Sir Brian, I don't want that to be overstated, and I wouldn't have wished to have done so. Sir Brian had the benefit of Sir Robert's report. I think he would say that he found it extremely useful that that study was undertaken, so he was able to consider Sir Robert's report before coming up with his own recommendations. But we must not allow any difference between the two, which is mainly of nuance, to get in the way of our proper and full consideration of Sir Brian's report. The honourable gentleman also refers, as of other honourable members, to interim payments. All I can say is that there is a very clear recommendation from Sir Brian. We are working through all of this, and we will be returning to the House in due course, having had an opportunity to review fully those recommendations.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent's father died following infected factor 8 treatment. The family did not feel they could grieve openly because of the stigma around HIV and AIDS at the time of his death. My constituent has told me that although a compensation payment would not bring back their father, it would finally give the family a sense of closure. Does the Minister accept the symbolic importance of compensation payments? And will the government now commit to including children who have lost a parent in the scope of the compensation scheme, as recommended by Sir Brian Langston?
Minister.
I think one of the very, very worst aspects of many dreadful aspects of this scandal is the stigma to which the Honourable Lady refers. To go as a child through the circumstances of being extremely ill, but for your parents to then be worried about the stigma and moving house or moving school or moving work, it is deeply, for those of us shocked reading it now, and in many cases we're 20, 30, 40 years on from the circumstances, it is an absolute hell these people went through, with the stigma laid on top of dreadful circumstances. And I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for reminding us of that. I'm afraid I'm not in a position, though, to make piecemeal comments regarding the recommendation that Sir Brian has made. I think it is, as I've said before, it's vital that he produce this report. It's a very comprehensive report, and we do need to go through it thoroughly and then produce a response in due course when we've had a chance to do so.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. You know, the length of this scandal can be summed up with the fact that my predecessor spent 18 years pursuing certain cases, and I've spent the last 8 years pursuing the same cases to try and bring them to resolution. Now, the Minister rightly says there's work to be done following these recommendations, but what timescales has he set for that work to be done in terms of them being able to prepare a response, and also what work has been done in preparation for potential recruitment of people to actually deal with many of these claims via the structure proposed, and from experience with another complex compensation scheme stretching over decades that is far easier said than done?
Minister. My honourable friend raises a good point. There is work was undertaken prior to the release of the second interim report based on Sir Robert's original study, which helps us considerably. We're now working at pace to go through the changes, but also going through what the government's stance will be overall. But we are working at pace. I'm not going to set a timeline to it, but we are. On recruitment, my honourable friend raises a good point that if a ALB route is the way forward, there's no time needs to be lost in finding a route for good people who've got expertise to be brought into the process prior to the formal establishment of an ALB, if that's the route we go down.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The gut-wrenching truth of the matter is that people are decaying and dying while his government dithers and delays. The people who are concerned in this will have heard nothing new today from the Minister. So can he, for their benefit, so that they know he's fighting for them, confirm that he believes the recommendations to widen the scope of the payment should be agreed? And will he fight for those compensation payments to be made this year to the people affected?
Minister.
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that it would be wrong to characterise the circumstance today as there being one of no progress. The fact that Sir Brian Langstaff has produced his report is a huge step forward. As I say, it is fantastic that he has come forward with the second interim report specifically on compensation. I already accepted on behalf of the government, I speak on behalf of the government, and on behalf of the government I accepted the moral case for compensation back in December. We now need to go through what Sir Brian has written, which has been the culmination of many years' work, and then take decisions on that, and then come back to the House.
Jonathan Dinockley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the government's clear determination, as shown by the Minister today, to move faster towards a just resolution to this sad and terrible scandal. As an MP representing a Huntingdon family devastated by this affair, who were long concerned at the inability to engage with ministers, will my right honourable friend now confirm that ongoing engagement with victims' families will take place with proper understanding for their tragic plight?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I can confirm to my right honourable friend, yes, if there's... I previously met, I think most of us in our constituency capacities have been aware of the victims of this dreadful scandal. Through the Right Honourable Lady in the APPG, I had the privilege of meeting representatives of those infected and affected, and I'm more than willing to do so again as we continue to progress our work on this.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is absolutely correct. There's tens of thousands of people fixed to their televisions today expecting a resolution to this inquiry. They're disappointed. I'll tell you why they're disappointed, Minister. Because they haven't got time on their side. There's hundreds have already died, and there's more dying on a week-by-week basis. They haven't got time on their side. So we need to ensure that the government respond fully to this report. We need to ensure that the government set out a clear timetable on actions for this report. Remember, there's people dying as the government are dithering and delaying.
Minister.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right, alas, that the victims of this continue to die. Actually, Sir Brian makes a comment in his second interim report that we don't necessarily know the full scale of the medical impact of what went on in the 70s and 80s, and conditions are, in some cases, worsening. So the point is absolutely well made. The honourable gentleman says we must respond fully. We must and we will. and we will do so when we have done the work that is required.
Damien Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And, I welcome on behalf of my constituents affected by this the sensitivity in which the government has been dealing with it. However, the lack of urgency is undermining that goodwill on behalf of victims and their families, and it's letting victims and their families down every single day. How long is it going to be between accepting one of these points and implementing them? Would it not just be easy to implement them now? And I think listening to members and the way they've spoken today, the best thing to do would be to implement them and work on getting this support to families as soon as possible.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman. There is urgency, I can assure him, in terms of our response. As I say, it was 8 working days ago that the report was produced. We are working at pace to go through it. We will continue to do so. We need to determine our view on all of those recommendations, but that does not necessarily preclude us taking individual steps between now and the conclusion of the inquiry, and we will continue to work.
Jessica Morden.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Please don't delay this any longer. I know the Minister will say it's complicated. He said that at the last statement, but the government's known about this for a long, long time and should have been preparing. And bereaved families like the Smiths in my constituency, whose case I've been raising for 18 years now, need interim payments now. Does the Minister really get that those who have waited years for justice and for redress just can't afford to wait any longer?
Minister.
I'm familiar with the constituency case of the Honourable Lady. She's raised it many times, and I'm familiar with the sad story, which is one of so many around this House. I cannot add to what I've said earlier. I recognise the strength of feeling in this House and in the infected and affected communities. We absolutely do, and I'm grateful that we have, with Sir Brian's report, a really thorough analysis for us to work through.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister accept that the uncertainty of when the Government will fully respond to this report risks damaging people's mental health? I'm thinking of a number of constituents who've contacted me that there's a real impact on mental health, and so can he set out an actual timetable, or does he have a timetable in his head for action? And does he also accept the principle of making interim payments to bereaved parents and children, many of whom gave up their working careers, many of whom did not reach their educational and academic potential because of the years they were caring for their loved ones?
Minister.
On the timetable, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are determined to be in the best possible place to respond to the inquiry when it concludes. But as I've said to other honourable members, that doesn't preclude us doing other steps earlier if that is what we determine to do as a government. We are working at pace to go through all of the implications of the report. On the second point that the honourable gentleman raises, I can't go through individual recommendations at this stage. He will appreciate why, but I do recognise the extremely strong case that Sir Brian has made for a number of those who have been affected, including carers who have given up a great deal to support others.
Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of my constituents contracted hepatitis C from a botched blood bag in the 1980s. Her daughter wrote to me last year, and I quote, she said, "I'm furious that you have grudgingly decided to pay interim compensation after she finally could fight no longer, 7 weeks after she died. In the meantime, I'm left with grief and nothing else to show for all the misery. In addition to all the horrors that my constituent and her mother went through, the daughter is also not eligible for compensation as she's not a partner of the bereaved. Could I ask the Minister, does he think this is fair?"
Minister.
Look, I'm very sorry to hear about the loss of the honourable lady's constituent. It was a significant step forward and a positive step forward that the government accepted in full Sir Brian's recommendation about those infected and bereaved partners and brought forward the £100,000 of compensation that was paid last October. It's tragic that, for the reasons stated earlier in relation to the scale of loss ongoing from this scandal, that there will have been individuals who missed out on those compensation because of their death, even between the announcement and the payment of the compensation, which is, and I really feel for the family of the Honourable Lady's constituent. The Honourable Lady specifically referred to payments to beyond the interim payments that were made last year. Sir Brian has made a very specific recommendation on that. We're not responding to it today, but it is one of the many recommendations that we're working through.
Alison Thulis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent's father died in England in the late 1970s, and she tells me that she is his only surviving next of kin. So can the Minister confirm where my constituent and many others like her will obtain the compensation that they are clearly due, and what proof will be required to access it, given the notorious related scandal around medical records? Because bereaved people in these circumstances don't need more barriers, they need compensation after all they've suffered.
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and she raises an extremely good point in terms of the evidence to be produced to access any future compensation scheme. It was a minor point of difference between the two reports between Sir Robert and Sir Brian in terms of the evidential test, but everyone is very aware that given the history of records not being available and the length of time that has been passed, well, Sir Brian has been very clear that an appropriate approach must be taken to a compensation scheme if it is established along those lines to ensure that it doesn't preclude people who have got no means of showing their ability to access the scheme because of factors completely beyond their control.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a point that's been made by so many colleagues in the chamber already, but children of those lost as a consequence of the scandal feel particularly unseen and unheard by the progress that's been made so far. So can the Minister assure them that there will be a focus for this government when recognising not only their loss, but also in delivering compensation payments through the scheme to them as a priority?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Lady. As I said before, children are a particularly harrowing aspect of this. Sir Brian has made very specific recommendations. We're not responding to those today, but we are working through them, and we will continue to do so, I can assure the Honourable Lady.
Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, I express sympathy and solidarity with my constituents who have been affected as well. Does the Minister accept, as I think the questions are demonstrating, that the longer it takes to implement, the more complicated it is going to become, and not least because of the question of estates and surviving relatives becomes increasingly into play? So does the Government recognise the need to confirm the individuals that are due compensation and then pay them as quickly as possible?
Minister.
The Honourable Gentleman appreciate that is exactly the process that we're going through. It's working through Sir Brian's report, where he makes specific recommendations, including the eligibility of the states. He recommends that the estates of those infected should be included with any scheme. But these are all, he's not wrong in saying that these are all complicated. The risk is becoming more complicated, and we want to make certain that we make progress and come to a resolution in our consideration of that report.
Catherine West.
Deputy Speaker, when I entered this House, my young constituent was in the nursery and we all hoped that this would be resolved quickly. She then graduated to primary school and now she's about to go into secondary school. The loss of her father was absolutely devastating to this terrible infected blood scandal. Two questions. One is, will she receive compensation? Because there seems to be a question about whether children will get compensation. And secondly, the psychological research is only being done now to look at the support needs. How can it be that after this many years that the research is only beginning now to look on commissioning a bespoke service? And will he apologise for that specific delay?
Minister.
I can't confirm the details of what would be within a compensation scheme if that comes forward, simply because that is the work we are undertaking now. I recognise the urgency represented by the Honourable Lady. In terms of the psychological needs, there are different progress has been made around the United Kingdom. There are schemes established in in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. There is £900 available every year in England, but there is being work undertaken now to ensure that that a tailored scheme would be absolutely appropriate, and that is ongoing, and we expect to hear over the next few months as to what the answer will be on the psychological scheme. That's something which has been conducted by my ministerial colleagues in the Department of Health.
Anna Bardell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I am afraid that it is simply not good enough. It is like Groundhog Day for our constituents who have been impacted by the contaminated blood scandal. And it's not good enough to come to the dispatch box when there's been so much time and so many reports with so little to say to our constituents. Constituents like mine, Vera Gaskin and Linda Cannon. Linda emailed me last night to say the consequences for me have been devastating. My life has been ruined beyond belief. I lost my husband 37 years under horrendous circumstances which were hard to bear. Decades have gone by, Madam Deputy Speaker, and nothing has been done. We welcome the reports, of course we welcome the reports, but the Minister must not use those to hide behind and kick the can down the road for those victims. There's clearly cross-party support for taking those interim measures, so why doesn't he get on and do it?
Minister.
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. This has been going on for decades. That was why it was vital that the inquiry was set up as it was in 2017 by my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead. This is a significant moment in the course of that inquiry. The production of an interim report specifically dealing with compensation was delivered 8 working days ago. It's extraordinarily important that that's been made. It is a thorough report. We need to go through it. So I recognise the determination from all sides of this House to see this to resolution. I recognise the frustration of the Honourable Lady, and she is reflecting the frustration of her constituents and many others, I know. But it was only during the Easter recess that this report was established. We need to work through it, and we need to come back to this House when we've done that work.
Charlotte Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's statement is incredibly light on substance or actual commitments, and there is no reason that the government could not begin verifying and registering those affected in preparation for the publication of the final report for the swift delivery of compensation. The Minister's own statement reiterates the need for pace, and yet there's no commitment to even beginning this or a vague timeline when this might be begun at a time when victims are dying every week and we're in a sustained cost of living crisis. Justice delayed is justice denied. Why is the government causing further unnecessary delays with their inaction? Have the victims and their families not already suffered more than enough?
Minister.
I recognise the determination of the Honourable Lady. It is fair to say that in terms of registering those who may be eligible for a future compensation scheme, those registered would have varied between the Sir Robert Francis study and the report produced by Sir Brian Langstaff. So we do need to do the work. We do need to ensure that we have absolute clarity on which approach we're taking, and that is announced, and there is clarity for the victims. But I absolutely commit, there will be no unnecessary delays, as the Honourable Lady puts it. There is, however, a need and a necessity to do the work to make certain that we have an effective and proper and appropriate response to what is a very thorough report.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have a constituent called Brian Ross, and I have his permission to use his name here. His family have been known to my family for generations. He received contaminated blood in the 1980s, and like so many others, is left susceptible to cancer. And I've sat down with him and I've talked to him about the stress, the fear, the really black fear that surrounds him and his family. For Brian Ross's sake, can I ask the Minister to make sure that nothing impedes some scheme for him? We don't know how long he's got. And in working with the victims, their legal representatives, and indeed, the Minister mentioned the devolved institutions, let's make sure that nothing is a glitch in all this. And please do this for Brian Ross's sake.
Minister.
The Honourable Gentleman speaks from the heart, and I totally recognise the issues that he raises on behalf of his constituent, Mr. Ross. I can only reiterate that we've come a long way on this subject. 2017, this was established. We now have a thorough report specifically on compensation. That is a major step forward from where we were at any stage prior to 8 days ago. And we will do all the work and ensure that we come back with a proper and full and appropriate response.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituent's son received infected blood in the 80s, and the trauma and cost on that family is incalculable, as described by many other MPs here today. Time is not on the side of many of these families. I'm going to ask the Paymaster General a specific question, because he seems to avoid giving any specific facts of what's going to happen now. Is it not unreasonable to have a compensation scheme up and running by the end of this year?
Minister.
That is what Sir Brian recommends. So Sir Brian believes that it is possible to achieve that. We need to work through and produce our response to Sir Brian. I'm not in a position to confirm timings as yet or what our response will be. But the Honourable Lady is absolutely right in saying that Sir Brian Langstaff recommends that we should be in a position to put to get a scheme in place by the end of the year. We need to do the work. We need to be able to come back to this House.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could I first of all argue in favour of the importance of the independence of the compensation scheme? I think many, perhaps not all, people here would argue that the Windrush compensation scheme, for example, was hindered by its lack of arm's length from the Home Office. And secondly, could I also ask, in anticipation that the Government does accept recommendations about the scope of the compensation scheme, could he look to use information from the infected blood support schemes to start registering and verifying those who will qualify right now in order to save some time further down the line?
Minister.
Look, I thank the honourable gentleman. We are, as part of the work I alluded to, looking at a whole range of compensation schemes, and they come in different shapes and sizes.